2015, more than 6 years on from the global financial meltdown, and Europe is still a synonym for crisis. The latest phase of crisis unravelled when in Greece the radical left Syriza party won office with a near 10% lead over its nearest rivals, the conservative New Democracy. The reverberations were felt as Spain's leftist anti-austerity Podemos party rose to second place in the polls. Syriza's mandate: to stop the bailout packages which accept European loans to pay bankers, and kick out the representatives of the Troika, the European Commission, the European Central Bank and the IMF, who imposed the austerity programme that came with the bailouts. After 5 years of austerity, with public goods sold at fire sale prices and mass job cuts, the economy had shrunk by 23%. There was an explosion in dependence on soup kitchens, and the healthcare system was so lacerated by cuts that people came to rely on volunteer-run clinics. The euro remedy hadn't worked. So how would the media handle this latest turn in the crisis? No matter what media outlet one turned to, Syriza's victory meant one thing: fresh crisis and instability. This was the message from the Financial Times to the Washington Post and the Wall Street Journal. But the media gave little clue to understanding why Syriza was elected. Reuters, for example, still refers to the bailout money sent to Greece as aid, as if to imply that it was some sort of humanitarian gesture. Few reports mentioned that only 1.6% of the money actually entered the Greek economy, and 98% went to the banks. And with the collapse in the Greek economy aggravated by austerity, by 2015, the debt owed amounted to 175% of Greek GDP. As even the pro-EU business magazine The Economist acknowledged, this was simply impossible to pay. Yet the European press rallied against Syriza. The German newspaper Die Zeit was rattled but confident, gloating that Syriza leader Alexis Tsipras would now have to face reality, since Greece needs money fast. He would have to accept the bailout, strings attached. Die Welt was more unsettled by the new government, and particularly its charismatic finance minister Yanis Varoufakis, whom it called an academic ruffian, while the Journal du Dimanche referred to him as Monsieur Catastrophe. The French newspaper Le Monde aligned to the Socialist Party leadership, having predicted that a Syriza victory would send Greece on a spiral of failure, went on a mission to vilify the new government. Leading the charge was columnist Arnaud Leparmentier, who insisted that the Greeks were fraudsters and victims of themselves, not of Europe. Besides, giving in to them would only open the doors to other populist forces such as Podemos in Spain. The Spanish press, duly frightened of a possible Podemos victory, has also joined in the attacks. Tsipras is a political adolescent, the centre-left El País warns, whose clumsy strategy shows that Syriza and Podemos have no solutions. In another article denouncing the Greek masquerade, it claimed that the Troika was right to try to impose structural reforms and that Greece was inept in implementing them. In another piece, it denounced Syriza as part of a populist trend alongside the fascist Le Pen in France. The same newspaper stresses, lest anyone get any ideas, that Greece and Spain are not the same. Nevertheless, it's sufficiently worried by developments to urge the European leadership to help Greece restructure the debt enough to make austerity more palatable. The right-wing national daily ABC lamented, "Populism takes over Greece." The conservative Madrid newspaper La Razón exclaimed "Desgracia," a pun meaning disgrace, and wailed, "Greeks run headlong into the populist abyss." But none of the newspapers could outdo the mortal dread of the country's conservative Partido Popular, which reacted to Syriza's victory by comparing it with ETA, the Catalonian paramilitary movement. But to understand why the European media have reacted in the way that they have, one must understand how they have collectively constructed the crisis that has afflicted the Eurozone, beginning with the global financial meltdown and its fallout. The origin of Europe's crisis lies in the banks. In 2008, investment in risky subprime mortgages were exposed as junk, and a chain of interlinked, highly exposed banks started to go broke. Banks stopped lending to each other and to businesses, and soon the financial system froze up. That was the credit crunch. But in rescuing the banks and managing the ensuing global recession, national states, led by the United States government, absorbed the bankers' debts. Part of this meant taking on the debts of private financial institutions, including those made to poorer southern European states, whose debts had suddenly become unmanageable. This was the sovereign debt crisis, and leaders of the EU decided that the problem was not the global financial meltdown, but the South's unsustainable spending habits and a bloated public sector. They offered loans to cover the debts, but in exchange for what they called structural reform. Greece needed structural reform as it was plagued by a corrupt, tax-avoiding elite. But what the Euro elites meant was austerity, spending cuts and privatizations. And austerity, codified in a memorandum of understanding between the Greek government and the Troika, was imposed by a panel of Troika-appointed inspectors. National sovereignty was effectively cancelled. None of this would have been palatable were it not for the role of the media, who made sure to deflect the blame for the crisis onto anyone but the bankers who had caused it and whose interests were being served with the bailouts. Thus, the popular German magazine Focus argued that Greeks were the cheats in the Euro family. The right-wing tabloid Bild Zeitung blamed the bankrupt Greeks, denouncing them as lazy, and demanded a written promise that they would pay all their debts in full. As Alex Alexandrou pointed out in the British centre-left magazine New Statesman, far from being lazy, Greek workers endure the second longest working hours in the industrialised world. The Spanish press also lined up behind austerity, even as the Partido Popular government cut spending by 12% amid a devastating recession. El País, close to the opposition Spanish socialist leadership, acknowledged the pitfalls of what it called extreme austerity, but nonetheless supported a milder austerian strategy for southern Europe. Given the growing danger of electoral rejection of austerity, however, it was of vital importance that national democracy be put on hiatus. This was demonstrated starkly when the Greek PASOK Prime Minister George Papandreou proposed to offer Greeks a referendum on any EU bailout. Immediately, the European press went on a rampage. The British tabloid The Sun was direct. Greece loses its marbles. But the upmarket French conservative newspaper Le Figaro was hardly better. Will Europe one day be rid of this Greek poison? The Spanish press, loyal to the austerity regime, moved instantly to shore up the austerian consensus that democracy was for cowards and maniacs. El País denounced this Greek nonsense, a suicidal and desperate initiative which threatened to throw Europe into the abyss. The conservative Spanish newspaper El Mundo denounced Papandreou for trying to evade his responsibility by hiding behind the opinion on the streets. In this, the press reflected the views of investors and capital market speculators, usually referred to impersonally as the markets. Papandreou was summoned to meet European Commission President Barroso and French President Nicolas Sarkozy, who ordered him to kill the referendum. He duly did, and tendered his resignation, leading to months of unelected technocratic government, followed by new elections. The public punishment was swift. By the spring of 2012, PASOK, the ruling centre-left party, was in a state of terminal collapse. A hitherto small, radical left party, Syriza, was catapulted up the polls when it called for a government of the left against austerity. In the elections, it took most of PASOK's vote and came a close second to the conservative New Democracy. Once again, the media response was furious. Bild had published a letter to the Greek electorate, arrogantly demanding that they return a pro-austerity government. Your ATMs continue to give you euros, it chastised, only because we put them there, the Germans and the other nations that have the euro. The German Handelsblatt conveyed Conservative Prime Minister Samaras' warnings of catastrophe if Greece voted for the radical left, and fulminated about extremists entering Parliament. An important aspect of the fear-mongering was the claim that if Syriza was elected, Greece would exit from the Eurozone, despite Syriza's express commitment to making the euro work, if possible. The crisis dragged on. The euro remedy only made Greece's position worse. Syriza had a consistent lead in polls, and by December 2014, the government was no longer able to command a majority in Parliament. An emergency election was called, and Syriza increased its share of the vote from 27% to 36%. Since the new Greek government took office, the same media who helped cover up the bankers' mess have been hyperactive in causing havoc for Syriza. As the financial commentator Francis Coppola writes, At several points, the media coverage was misleadingly claiming that Greece was about to default or refused to talk to its lenders, sending markets crashing again. Yet while reporting falsehood, they do not report salient and alarming facts, such as EC President Jean-Claude Juncker stating that there can be no democratic choice against the EU treaties. Why is this? Several studies of the European press coverage found that they overwhelmingly reported the views of politicians and bankers in explaining the crisis, aligned with the policy of national elites, and strongly favoured more EU control over national budgets. So this is the dilemma that we face. Our national media don't report the facts, reflect the views of Europe's rulers, and in the battle between democracy and the markets, always favour the markets. In moments of crisis, we are supposed to turn to the media for guidance. That is our access to the public sphere. But what if the media is part of the crisis?